Hey, it's Mr. Leventhal again with another video lecture on biology. Today we are going to learn about photosynthesis. The word photosynthesis can be broken down into light makes, and here it's light makes sugars. And I'd like to have us just consider a few things before we go through the actual process of photosynthesis. We can think of photosynthesis's importance in terms of ecosystems and ecosystem dynamics, as well as in terms of metabolism. So just starting with the idea of ecosystems, photosynthesis is responsible for providing all of the food for ecosystems, because photosynthesis is done by autotrophs, and autotrophs are things that make their own food. So these things are the producers in a food web and food chain. They are the organism that takes inorganics from the environment and converts them into organic molecules that are our food. In this lecture, I'm going to focus on photosynthesis in terms of its metabolic process. And photosynthesis is a process that does anabolism because it builds molecules from smaller molecules. It takes carbon dioxide and water and converts it into larger organic molecules. And the bulk of this discussion will be about this process. So when we look at photosynthesis, we can describe it as a set of two reactions. One reaction is called the light-dependent reaction, and the light-dependent reaction is responsible for producing energy that is used to fuel the synthesis process in the light-independent reaction, and this is the process that makes glucose. So the light-dependent reaction makes energy in the form of ATP, and we'll learn more about ATP in our next discussion. And this is responsible for making glucose in the light-independent reaction. As we study photosynthesis, you may want to think of these two focus questions. Why are solar panels and batteries a good metaphor for a plant? And you might think for a moment, if we look at my picture of carrots here, by the time we're done, you might want to think, all right, which part of the carrot are solar panels, and which part of the carrot is the battery? And then how do plants convert inorganic molecules into energy-storing organic molecules? And that is the point that I was trying to raise with you on this metabolism side, where photosynthesis is an anabolic process that makes organic molecules. So let's start this discussion by looking at the harmony in nature. We can look at photosynthesis in terms of reactants and products and organisms that are involved in this process. The process of photosynthesis, which I'll represent in green, takes in carbon dioxide and takes in water and uses these molecules as raw materials to make sugar in the form of glucose and the waste product of oxygen. So oxygen is a waste product. Glucose is a product. Carbon dioxide is a reactant. And water is a reactant. Now, animals are not capable of doing photosynthesis. Instead, they will use the product of photosynthesis in order to produce energy. And again, that energy is ATP. So here the animal will consume the glucose. It will require oxygen to maximize the energy stored in glucose. They will give off carbon dioxide, and they will give off metabolic water. So we can look at the oxygen and glucose as reactants. And carbon dioxide and water as products. Now I want you to note that this is a closed cycle. Now the other thing that's important to note is the process that's going on here. This is respiration. Because it's using oxygen, it's aerobic respiration. And it's important to know that if you have mitochondria, this is what you do. So we are not limited to animals. Anything with mitochondria will do aerobic respiration. And so that means that we're talking about fungi, protists, plants, animals, and anaerobic or aerobic bacteria, which don't have mitochondria. On the other side, photosynthesis is done by organisms with chloroplasts, and this includes plants, some protists, and then a type of bacteria that probably gave rise to the chloroplast called cyanobacteria. And these are photosynthetic bacteria that are basically like floating chloroplasts. So note that plants and protists can do both, at least some protists. And fungi, protists, plants, and animals, well, they can do respiration. So let's look at this at a cellular level. What you are looking at here is a typical plant cell. The plant cell has a mitochondria and a chloroplast. And what I'd like to do is just look at the flow of carbon dioxide, water, sugar, and oxygen into and out of the organelles. I want you to note that when we look at the chloroplast, that there are two different regions. There is one region represented here by a stack of elliptical objects. These are called thylakoids. And then there's the area that surrounds those thylakoids. That is a different place. And so I'm going to be putting these molecules into one of those two areas. Similarly, when we look at the mitochondria, we can see that there are two different locations. There's the area that is between this inner membrane and the outer membrane of the mitochondria. And so that outer membrane I'm now circling in blue. And then there's that space where the word mitochondria exists. So again, I want you to look at where I am putting my arrowhead. So let's start with oxygen gas. And it turns out that oxygen gas is produced by plants, and it's produced in the thylakoids. And that oxygen gas is a waste product, but note that all of the free-floating oxygen gas, also known as O2, on this planet is derived from photosynthesis. And that oxygen gas is used in this region of the mitochondria. Again, looking at products of photosynthesis, I'm going to grab the sugar, and that sugar is produced in the region called the stroma of the chloroplast. And then the sugar is used by the mitochondria to produce energy, and that is occurring, that sugar carbon breakdown is occurring in the transition of the cytoplasm, as well as in that region referred to as the mitochondrial matrix. And we'll learn more about the mitochondria when I talk about respiration. I'm going to use red arrows to represent the thing coming out of the mitochondria and going into the chloroplast. So let's begin with water. Water is generated in this inner membrane space of the mitochondria, and the water is actually what enters the thylakoid. So notice water goes into the thylakoid, oxygen comes out. And then carbon dioxide, which is going to be used by the plant, I guess I'll put it up here for you. That CO2 is produced within the matrix of the mitochondria and used by the stroma. So notice that each location has a reactant and a product. When we look at the process of photosynthesis, it is done by the chloroplast. The chloroplast is this structure. The chloroplast has membranes. It has light harvesting molecules. That light harvesting molecule is called chlorophyll. And it is that light harvesting molecule that makes plants green. And if we look inside of a plant leaf, we'll see that there are all sorts of cells that are responsible for doing photosynthesis. And these cells are sort of like solar panels because they collect light. We looked at Alodia previously in our class, which is an aquatic plant that's made up of only a few layers of cells. And as a result of that, you can actually see the chloroplasts inside of the cells. This diagram is just illustrating how the chloroplasts exist inside of a plant cell. Again, note, here is a chloroplast. This is a magnified version of a chloroplast. Again, another picture of a chloroplast. You can see the thing that we call thylakoids. Thylakoids store chlorophyll, and this is where the light-dependent reaction occurs. The area that surrounds the thylakoids, that's this space out here. This is called the stroma. And the stroma assembles glucose from CO2 and hydrogen using energy from the light-dependent reaction. So the stroma is the site of the light-independent reaction. So what I'd like to do in my closing slide is I'd like to put the whole process together for you. And if you can imagine the entire screen here as being a cell. So the cell wall would be just kind of continuous with our screen. Of course, it's not quite big enough. And inside of the cell wall, you are looking at a chloroplast. And the chloroplast is being represented by the oval. And it is a bigified chloroplast. It's super big because the typical plant cell should have hundreds of these chloroplasts. And you can see that I have pre-labeled the two key reactions. And I'm going to go in and show you where the molecules are flowing. So this first part, these things here, these are our thylakoids. And the thylakoids are responsible for the light-dependent reaction. And the thylakoids are going to have a reactant and a product. And what's going to happen is water, the water you use to water a plant, goes into the thylakoid. And the sun's energy, splits the water molecule. It breaks the water molecule up. And when it breaks the water molecule up, it will liberate the oxygen in that water molecule to make O2. And all of the oxygen gas on the planet comes from this one reaction. Now you'll note that the O2 is released, but the hydrogens in the water are not. And those hydrogens are passed into a molecule that is referred to as a hydrogen carrier. The molecule has a name, it's called NADPH, and you don't need to know that, but those hydrogen carriers get sent into the light-independent reaction, which is occurring in the stroma. Well, in addition to liberating these hydrogen atoms, the process of breaking water transfers energy into a temporary energy molecule called ATP. So we have hydrogen carriers and we have ATP that have been made, and that ATP is going to be used to fuel the light-independent reaction. Now, just like before, there are reactants and products for the light-independent reaction, which occurs in the stroma of the chloroplast. The reactant of the light-independent reaction is carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide is used to build sugar. Now look at what's going on here. We have carbon dioxide, we have hydrogen, we have ATP to provide energy for the anabolic process. That is the synthesis. And we produce sugar. Now we can look at this whole process and we can think of it in terms of an equation. The equation would look like this. 6 carbon dioxides plus 6 H2O with sun's energy will produce 6 oxygen plus 1 molecule of C6H12O6, which is glucose, which is food energy for life. Well, I know today was a long lecture. It's a rather complex process. I suggest you break it down, watch it maybe a second time. And that's it for today. Have a good one.